Greetings and welcome to Lisa Lives. Today I'm actually going to talk about a true crime case that I feel really needs to get as much publicity and needs to get put out there as much as is possible. This is something that I watched on a couple of other channels on a podcast in great detail. I know I said I wasn't going to do many true crime cases going forwards, but this is one I want to do purely just through complete and utter wishes to get the story out there, and the family have actually encouraged people to try to get Christian, their son's story out there. So with that being said, I would direct you to a couple of true crime YouTubers, one being Kendall Rae, who was actually approached by the family and who has done a two-part, over an hour long each episode documentary on this case, interviewing the family, loads of people concerning it. It's a Netflix level documentary, guys. The job that this girl has done is outstanding. I will link both parts below in the description. And also I watched another true crime YouTuber that I watched, Danielle Hallen, who went into the case and did cover some details that weren't actually in Kendall's documentary. But this case has got so much information, so much staggering just incompetence, that it's impossible to go into without having hours and hours. Also, the podcast Culpable, this is where you will find the most detail about this crime if you want to know more about it. And they have actually put forward a $100,000 reward for anyone that actually gives information, new information, leading to an arrest and a conviction. So with that being said, let's get into the story. So in 2014 in Meridian, Mississippi, 21-year-old Christian Andreacchio was found dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. Christian's death was actually determined to be a suicide following a 45-minute, you heard that right, investigation, which even that found evidence to the contrary. To start with, I wanted to go into some details, some very brief details about Christian's life. Christian had a very happy life, a very happy family life. He was very close to his parents, wanting to stay with them as long as he possibly could. He was very happy with his siblings. He had a very close relationship with his little sister, and he had been working for several years towards his dream job of being a captain on board. He went away to do stints of like 30 days at a time on a tugboat, and he was doing really well in his career. Just loved the job. Everyone he worked with loved him. He was the life and soul of the party, a really fun guy, someone that everyone liked, but there was other sides to him that even his parents didn't know, like a local elderly man. Christian would call in on him to check and see if he was okay, if there's something that he needed, and would sit and chat to him for half an hour. Like, his own family didn't know he did things like this. So although Christian was your typical 21-year-old, you know, full of life, full of fun, life and soul of the party, he had a real good heart there too. There was only one part of his life at the age of 21 that perhaps wasn't as perfect as the rest was, and this was his romantic life. He had dated all through his teens from high school, a young girl. They'd been very close, the families had been very close, they were very much in love, but it was one of those like young romances, and I think deep down they both felt that maybe one day they would end up back together. But she was going to veterinary school, he was away for long stretches of time on the boat, so they decided to call the relationship a day. So after they stopped dating, Christian actually started to date a young lady, 17-year-old Whitley Goodman. Now, from substantial interviewing, speaking to people that's been done since Christian's death, Whitley wasn't a very popular person. She did blame her upbringing, that she hadn't a very good relationship with her family. But anyone that they spoke to really did not have anything positive to say about Whitley. They even spoke to people that claimed to be close friends of Whitley, and even they said she was manipulative and just not really dishonest, not really a very nice person to be around. But Christian and her got together. I think he was very attracted to sort of that wild streak in her. But something that did get in the way of the relationship was that Whitley had a bit of a problem with drugs. As well as the usual cases of, alcohol and different drugs, Whitley had a bit of an issue with the drug Xanax. Which, if you know anything about the drug, obviously here in Ireland and the UK, we don't have the brand name of Xanax, but it's something that pretty much you take and it zonks you out, you can sleep, you're pretty much dozy and dopey and all those sorts of things. So this was a bit of a bone of contention between Whitley and Christian, and they did argue about it, and he did have issue when he went away for the stretches of 30 days at a time of not really 100% trusting Whitley and what exactly she would be up to while he was away. As well as Christian having these misgivings, his family never really bonded with Whitley in the way that they had with his ex-girlfriend. They sort of knew that there was something not entirely right. You know when you have that feeling when you're a parent, no, this isn't the right relationship, but they went with it. They were perfectly kind and accommodating and nice to her, until that she showed a bit of her true colours. As I said previously, the families of Christian and his ex-girlfriend were close. They got on very well with her. She was a childhood sweetheart. The family loved her. Christian's mother had a lot of photographs around her home, and I completely relate to this. I'm addicted to photographs. I have them framed everywhere, on walls everywhere. This was something that Christian's mother liked to do also. She had photographs of her kids going right back to when they were really young, and amongst all these photographs there was one photograph of Christian with his ex-girlfriend. Whitley, however, was not very happy about this. On first hearing this story, I could kind of understand a young girl being insecure, 17-year-old, feeling that she wasn't liked quite as much. So I kind of initially thought, well, I can kind of get her being a bit put out that photograph's there, but to actually go into Christian's mother's bedroom, remove the photograph, and she actually put a hole through his ex-girlfriend in the photograph. Now, it's been discussed, was it done with a knife, was it done with a gun, did she actually shoot it? Because it is something that was quite common. A lot of young people did like to go shooting in the area. Is this something that she did? Or whatever the case is, she damaged the photograph, marched straight into Christian's mother's bedroom, put the photograph face down on the table and said, "That is what I think of that photograph." Now, thinking back, even now as a fully grown woman, married woman, I wouldn't dream of doing that to my in-laws, damaging their property and then casting aspersions as to what they choose to have on their wall or on their bedside or their table, wherever it was. But this is what Whitley did, and for a young 17-year-old girl to have the nous to do that, it sort of began to give the family a bit of warning signs as to this young lady was really not someone that perhaps wanted their son to be with. But life went on. They did speak to Christian about it. They did say that they weren't very happy about it. He tried to defend her, and life went on. But Whitley, again, her jealousy came to a head. She had severe issues with Christian's relationship with his younger sister. She was quite a bit younger than him. He was very close to her. She very much looked up to him. But Whitley was jealous of the relationship that Christian had with his little sister, so much so that she would actually make up things that the little sister was meant to be doing, which were completely false, which were completely untrue, and would contact the parents and say, "She's doing this, she's doing that." It was found to be the case that she was stirring the pot, she was telling lies, and Christian's parents said that they did not want her in the house again. So let's get on to the day in question when Christian died. I may refer to my notes somewhere along the line here, so please forgive me for looking down. So let's go back to a few days before, to February the 22nd. And Christian and Whitley had been arguing about what I discussed already, the fact that he didn't really trust her, that he was going away, that he'd asked her to sort of keep her nose clean, to, quite literally I suppose, not to be doing drugs, going out and getting into trouble, and that he'd be back soon. So he goes off for a 30-day stint at his job, and they weren't in the best of speaking terms when he left. They weren't really speaking. So the day before Christian dies, he starts to receive on the boat frantic telephone calls from a friend of his by the name of Dylan. Dylan was also a friend of Whitley's. They all knew one another. And he seemed to be trying to get any opportunity, any excuse to get Christian to leave the boat and to come home. Eventually he uses the excuse, after having tried several others, that he has seen Whitley in Christian's BMW, which he had specifically forbidden her from using when he was away, probably because of the whole drugs and drink thing. He didn't want her getting into an accident or doing something she shouldn't be. But Dylan said that he had saw Whitley in Christian's BMW driving around with another guy that he knew and that everyone in the area knew to be a well-known drug dealer. So this one eventually gets a reaction from Christian, and he said, "Right, I'm coming back, I'm kicking her out of the apartment, this is it, I've had it, I'm getting my car back." So he asked Dylan to come and collect him the next day, sort of 7:45 to 8 a.m. He would use some excuse to try to get off the boat, because they were meant to be stationed there for the 30 days. They weren't supposed to just leave. And he was going to come back and sort this out and then go back to work. So he actually told his crewmates that his parents were fighting and that he needed to go and try and sort it out. He was leaving the next morning, but he would be back. He would return by 5 p.m. that same day. So the next morning on the 26th, this is February by the way, Dylan arrives as previously arranged at 8 a.m. to collect Christian to drive back up to Meridian so that he can sort things out with Whitley. On the way they make one stop off for gas, and they arrive back at the apartment at approximately 11:30 a.m. At 4:30 p.m. that same day, Dylan calls 911 and reports that he has found his friend Christian dead and slumped over the bathtub with a bullet wound to his head. If I can actually get the 911 call, I will insert it here.
Christian.
911, where's your emergency?
Ma'am, we've had a suicide.
You had a suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, what's your address?
The Woodland apartment.
You don't know how, there's no weapons or anything?
I think he shot himself.
Okay, you think he shot himself?
Yes, ma'am. I left to go to the store, and he went to the bathroom. I thought he was taking a shower.
Okay, did he say that he was going to do this, or?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Okay, she's not, okay, just try not to touch anything, okay?
Whitley.
Is she with him?
Come down here. They don't want you to touch anything. Come on.
Just try to, if it...
Come here, Whitley. Come here.
Okay.
So it sounds pretty convincing to me. He does sound quite distraught. Initially hearing this, I thought, how horrible, what a horrible thing to find out. But little was I to know when I got to know the rest of the case that perhaps not everything was as it seems. So at 4:45, 15 minutes after that telephone call from Dylan to 911, the first police officer arrives on scene. He was followed by other police officers, by EMS, by detectives and by coroners who set about looking at the scene. 45 minutes later, the chief, the boss of all of these people, walked in and demanded that the scene be closed down as it was going to be ruled a suicide. And that was that. There was no further analysing of the scene. The only evidence that was collected from the scene was the bullet casing and the bullet itself. There was no real crime scene reconstruction attempted. They ruled this case a suicide within 45 minutes of them arriving on scene. So to give you an indication of the actual crime scene, Christian was found on his knees on the ground, slumped forward over the bathtub, with both his arms at his side and neither of them in the bathtub itself. His feet were crossed and were actually blocking the entrance, the pathway of the door, and that is something to remember for later on. We're going to get back to that. His knees were actually about a full foot back from the edge of the tub, so it's not like he was leaning against the tub or even standing above the tub. It just wasn't something that people could really put their head around. The position he was in was just very odd, and obviously if a person shoots himself in the head, they're going to fall forward, they're over the bath, quite possibly at least one of their arms is going to be in the bath, possibly both, possibly all of them if you imagine falling forward over a bath, but that's not the way he was found. So forgive sort of how I have to do this, but Christian did shoot himself on the right side of his head here. The bullet went straight through here, exited straight on the other side, and the bullet and casing were actually both found in the bathtub. To my knowledge, in a pool of blood. That itself doesn't make sense to me, how blood can land there before the bullet and casing, but in blood. There was no exit, there was no damage on the wall on the side that it would have exited from Christian's head. There was no damage to the bullet striking the bathtub, so there was no trajectory. It didn't make any sense. But again, none of this was actually investigated. It was just immediately closed down. There was, however, a small hole above a power outlet on the wall directly behind Christian, which would have made no sense to the crime scene, to what people were seeing, but it wasn't determined that this hole was indeed a bullet hole. It may not have been a bullet hole. But interestingly, the tip of the bullet itself was found to have foreign matter like debris in it, quite possibly drywall, which would go hand in hand with the hole being a bullet hole and someone actually taking the bullet from there and placing it in the bag. So also, as well as the positioning of his body, the bullet, the casing, something that was very unusual was the position of the gun when it was found. Again, forgive the crude how I have to put this, but if a person shoots themselves in this side of the head and the gun is facing this direction, anyone that knows anything about recoil from guns, you shoot yourself, the gun goes this way. The gun was actually found on Christian's left hand side, wedged between his leg and the bath, and it was found to be facing this way. So the gun has gone from this position, recoiled, hasn't gone this way, has flipped over this way to face the other direction on the other side. No one claims to have touched the gun after Christian supposedly shot himself with it. Also, when the first officer arrived, there is a report that the blood was quite coagulated, which, given the time frame of Christian supposed to have shot himself, it had to have been somewhere within the previous hour. Blood would not have coagulated to that degree by that stage. But there is much more evidence that we're going to move on to. I want to get into the explanation by Whitley and Dylan as to what transpired that afternoon, just so you can see the ridiculous inconsistencies in this case and why the family are really pushing for this case to be reopened. The town itself of Meridian, it's just ridiculous. I don't want to go into everything, the corruption, even from the DA's office. I want to direct you towards Kendall Rae's documentary to watch it if you're interested at all. Everything I found out, she was there through elections to try to get a new DA in, to try to get this case opened and looked at, but no one seems to want to know. And anything they can do to put obstacles in the way of this family, they will do. So, as I already said, I will get into Dylan and Whitley's statements, but because no one was given them any form of justice, for goodness sake, the brother had to come in and actually clean up the crime scene themselves. He had to clean his brother's, the crime scene, which must have been, I can't even imagine. He found a very badly blood-soaked t-shirt stuffed behind the toilet that the police hadn't found. All they'd taken with them was the bullet and the casing. And he also found a blood-soaked knife, which again the police had not taken with them. He brought this to the authorities, but subsequently they were both lost. At this stage, the family are virtually tearing their hair out, and they actually set about hiring their own experts. They hire a very, very well-respected guy that works in the field of forensics. Apology, I don't actually have his name. Again, I direct you towards Kendall Rae's documentary. He's very well respected. He's worked on very high profile cases, and this guy does not put his name to something unless he's confident and very confident in his findings. And he did say that he would confidently stand in a court of law and report his findings. And he found that the crime scene, as we've already discussed, just did not add up. They also hired people to go over the crime scene and to actually set it up, do like a walkthrough as to what happened to see if it made sense. Nothing did. Some of the findings from there, we've already discussed the lack of blood spatter, the lack of damage to the wall. We've discussed the placement of Christian's body, his arms, which seem to have been very oddly placed. But two other things that were found that are completely impossible to argue with, one of which was lividity. Now, if you don't know what lividity is, it actually, when a person passes away, the blood pools in whatever position that person may be laying. The blood settles because your heart has stopped pumping. So if you die and are lay on your back, the blood will all coagulate to your back, the backs of your legs, the backs of your arms, wherever you're lying, so the blood just goes downwards. So there was lividity found in the back of Christian's right leg. Now obviously he is supposedly shot himself, fell forward, he's on his knees. The blood should all be against his shins, it should pull downwards. The fact that the blood actually pulled on the back of his leg means that he has to have been moved at some stage. Also, another fact which again biology cannot be argued with, rigor mortis. Rigor mortis actually sets in immediately after death. After 4 hours, the body will be fully in a full state of rigor mortis. And it stays this way until 12 hours after death, and then the muscles will start to relax, and the rigor mortis will be removed from the body. When the body was found, it was found to actually be in a state of rigor mortis. Now, with the timeline, Christian at this stage should not have been dead any more than 1 hour maximum. That's giving maximum time for him to be discovered, but yet rigor mortis has set in fully. So it was determined by the experts, the forensic experts, that Christian must have been dead for a period of at least 4 hours before his body was actually found, which does not add up to the story which Dylan and Whitley had been putting forward. So, to their statements and to the most ridiculous in the whole case as it stands. Another point to mention about the gun was actually a semi-automatic 45 Kember pistol. Now, anyone that knows anything about guns will know that if a gun is semi-automatic, so when you use the gun, the actual gun then is completely ready for refire again. The gun is already cocked. When the gun was found, it actually wasn't cocked, so someone has to have manually uncocked that gun. Christian, after he shot himself in the head? Sounds very unlikely, but both Whitley and Dylan claim to have not laid hands on that gun after he killed himself. So Dylan was interviewed, and Dylan obviously went into having picked Christian up at work, what time he left at, what time he arrived there, that all tied together, that they stopped off for gas. He had a receipt from that station which tied together, but he said, this is when I was talking to Christian. Now obviously, I don't think I've gone into the journey for him to actually get to pick Christian up was several hours. It was quite far away. And he obviously must have been a pretty good friend to go that far to pick his buddy up and take him all the way back again. But he says during this ride with Christian back home, this is when he discovers that Christian and Whitley are having relationship issues, and this is when he discovers that he's going back up there. He's not happy with what she's doing, he's going to chuck her out, all the rest of it. But this is completely contrary to the fact that it was actually Dylan that informed Christian that Whitley was seen with this other guy in his car. He knew why Christian was coming home. He knew that Christian was pissed, that his girlfriend had deliberately defied him, had used his car against his wishes, and not only that, had been in the car with a known drug dealer. So why Dylan was lying to the police saying that he wasn't aware of any of this, or why he even thought that Christian was coming back in the first place. If you're asking your friend to drive several hours to collect you, take you back, surely you've told your friend why you want that to happen. It's completely away from the norm. You must be on that boat for 30 days. Guys, I must apologise. I have a problem with a small section of the video, so I'm just going to fill in that small section with audio recording of what I recorded earlier. So just bear with me. It'll just be a few minutes. So as we were discussing, Dylan did insinuate to the police that the first time he was made aware of the issue between Christian and his girlfriend Whitley was in the car on the drive back to Meridian, which we obviously know was not the case. We'll go back to the apartment. So they've arrived back at the apartment, and as they enter, a row ensues, as you would expect, because Christian is in no mood after having been told that his girlfriend's been driving about in his car with a known drug dealer. So Dylan decides to go upstairs to give the pair a bit of space. As they're rowing, he just has a peek down to see what's going on because things seem to be getting a bit heated. And he says that when he looks down, he can see Christian holding a gun to his head and asking Whitley repeatedly, "Do you love me?" She obviously says yes to defuse the situation. And according to Dylan, then things completely calm down, so much so that the three of them sit down together and watch a movie. The movie finishes and Dylan offers to go get something to eat for them all from Chick-fil-A. He also texts Whitley's telephone as it was broken in the argument between her and Christian. He offers to bring it to try to get it fixed somewhere. And as he's about to leave, Christian asks him something rather odd. He gives Dylan his bank card and asks him to withdraw all of the money in his bank account. Just out of the blue, Dylan apparently says, right, yeah, okay, I'll do that. But there's no discussion about, well, why do you want me to withdraw all your money? What's going on? So Dylan sets off, There is footage of him in the bank, so we know that did happen. There's CCTV footage. And he is declined, as you would expect, because Christian's not with him, Christian's not authorised, he's not stood there. They tell him that we cannot give you the money. So Dylan is refused the money, but he doesn't call Christian to say, hey dude, they didn't let me take the money. He instead calls a friend of his who actually works at the bank. Obviously he didn't get any joy from him, so he leaves the bank, heads to Chick-fil-A, and then heads back to the apartment. So the issue with this story is that Dylan is actually filmed in the bank trying to withdraw the money 45 minutes after he arrived back at the apartment, initially with Christian. It is actually a 24-minute round trip to the bank to get back home. This is not taken into consideration the trip to Chick-fil-A or whether he went to get Whitley's telephone fixed. According to Dylan, they got home, there was a big row, the row settled down, they watched an entire movie, and at that stage he left. So given that he was filmed in the bank 45 minutes after the return, this does not account for watching the movie, and it pretty much accounts for the row being pretty short to allow a person to be holding a gun to their head and threatening to kill themselves. So the timeline is just not making any sense at this stage. So according to Dylan at this stage, he returned to the apartment and they watched another movie together, so I suppose another hour and a half minimum. And when this movie finished, Dylan was feeling tired, so he had a 2-hour nap. This was while Christian and Whitley were going to go for a drive together to sort of try and thrash things out, talk about stuff, try and get things back on track. When Dylan woke back up from his nap, Whitley was asleep upstairs and Dylan was sat on the sofa having a cigarette. So he decided that he wanted to go to Best Buy. He was interested in getting some speakers, so he wanted to go and see if he could source those. Now before he leaves, something I didn't actually mention, initially when Christian supposedly held the gun to his own head, Dylan had taken it from him and hidden it, just so that Christian didn't do something stupid, and when he hid it behind a curtain and he hadn't given it back to him since. On this occasion, when Dylan's going to leave to go to Best Buy, he takes the gun from its hiding place behind the curtain and he gives it back to Christian and says something daft like, now make sure you unload that and don't touch it, which in itself is quite weird. And when questioned by police as to why did he do this, why did you give him the gun back when you left the second time, he said, because I couldn't take it with me. But it wasn't an issue that he didn't take it with him the first time when he went to Chick-fil-A in the bank, but this time he didn't want to take it with him. So that in itself is confusing. So indeed he did go to Best Buy to speak to an audio technician, and he returned back home. He didn't buy any speakers. It has been said, could he have been trying to stage an alibi at this stage? He returns back home, and Whitley is on the sofa asleep at this stage. She'd been upstairs asleep, I think, initially when he left. And Christian wasn't there. Then he noticed there was a light on in the bathroom, so he assumed that Christian was having a shower, and he went up, knocked the door, and he shouted in, "Are you okay?" Now, I don't know about you, but if I think my pal's having a shower, I'm not going to knock the door and say, "Are you okay?" Any normal person can generally hear if someone's in the shower from outside the door, so that's unusual. The apartment itself was very, very small, so you could probably hear that shower running from most of the overall, even downstairs. But he knocked the door and asked if he was all right. He didn't get a response. So he goes back down and he wakes Whitley up. He says, "Whitley, can you come with me and check on Christian? He's not answering me." Now, I'm not sure at this stage. He woke Whitley up to come with him to check, but what I've heard is, from all of the sources, is that he went back up. Whitley wasn't with him. He knocked the door again and he said, "Are you okay?" Now, if I'm checking if my pal's in a room, I'm going to knock the door and say, "Are you in there?" I'm not going to say, "Are you okay?" unless I'm worried that something's happened. So he knocks the door a second time. "Are you okay?" No answer. So he opens the door. Now remember how Christian's body was found. I mentioned earlier that his feet were over into the pathway of the door, which would actually have prevented Dylan from fully pushing the door open. He would have come up against Dylan's feet, which he doesn't say that happened. He claims he never touched the body, moved the body, none of that stuff. He took one look into the room, he saw Christian slumped forward over the bath, he saw the blood, he ran straight back down, or he shouted, "Whitley, Christian's shot himself, he's dead." Now, he didn't check the body at this stage to confirm that he was dead. He just shouted, "He's dead." Now, Whitley previously claims to, this, as I said, this is a very small apartment. She also has a dog. She claims not to have heard the gunshot because she was asleep. That gunshot would have been very loud. She claims not to have heard Dylan coming back. But when Dylan shouts, "Whitley, wake up," she instantly wakes up. So that in itself is a bit odd. But she was sort of seen to be spaced out on Xanax at the time, which does make you very sleepy and tired, I believe. But it's unusual that certain things like a gun being fired, which would set a dog off as well, so the dog most probably barked. None of this apparently woke her up, but someone just saying to her to wake up woke her up. That in itself, to me, stood out. So it's at that stage that Dylan calls 911, reports that he has just found his friend dead in the bathroom, and we got into earlier, the police come out, we know everything that happened from that stage. So let's go back to that timeline, and I'm probably going to look down while I'm talking here. We know that Christian and Dylan arrived back at the apartment at 11:30 a.m. We know that the telephone call to 911 was placed at 4:30 p.m, so 5 hours. And in those 5 hours, there was a row. They watched 2 movies. Let's say we'll give an hour and a half. That's 2 short movies. That's 3 hours. Dylan had a 2-hour nap. That's another 2. That's 5 hours. And he has gone out to the bank. He's come back. He's gone to look at speakers. We do not have enough time for everything that Dylan says happened to have actually happened. None of it ties together. So when Whitley was interviewed, the interview was very much all about her relationship with Christian, even though that wasn't what the police were asking. She said that he said he was going to leave his job and return home, which when anyone else was told, they said no way. This was his dream job. He'd been working towards getting captain in that job for years. He would never have left his job. He loved it. He was very happy in his job. We also found out that Whitley told Christian that she was pregnant, which wasn't the case. And that she'd said to him, if something happens to you, who's going to look after the baby? She also is found to have tried to get Christian to add her to his life insurance policy as the benefactor should anything happen to him. All of this sounding a bit suspect. The police actually asked Whitley if Christian had ever mentioned wanting to hurt himself, and she said, "I don't think so." Now remember earlier that day he held a gun to his head? She made no reference to that. She didn't tell the police about that. Dylan had mentioned that, but Whitley never made any mention of it. So the next thing we move on to, GSR test. GSR is gunshot residue, which if you shoot a gun, you will be found to have residue on your hands from where you've shot the gun. This tends to stay on the hands for between 4 and 6 hours, depending on whether you wash, whether you handle other things. If you wash, you're going to get rid of it. If you don't really touch other stuff, you don't touch anything, it might be there 4 to 6 hours later. Both Dylan and Whitley were found to have gunshot residue on their hands. Now Whitley, when she's tested, tells the police, "You're going to find residue on my hands because I shot a gun last night." She tells a story about being with a friend called Matt, and Matt was there with his cousin Jeff. Jeff had got a new gun and he wanted to shoot it. She claims that she shot his gun the night before, which is not unusual. It's something young folk did. If you're listening to this in the UK, you'll probably think, oh my god, shooting guns, what's this all about? It was common, it was something they did. But Matt tells a different story. Matt said that Whitley didn't shoot the guns because she was terrified of them. She actually sat on his lap the whole evening, and he sat with his hands over her ears because of the sound was freaking her out. And he was with her that whole evening, and he said no, she did not shoot any guns. Oddly, when Christian had left to go onto his boat, she had actually got in touch with this guy, Matt, who she barely knew. I think she got in touch with him via Snapchat and asked to meet up. She was sort of come on quite heavy, and they ended up hanging out this night, and they ended up sleeping together afterwards. He dropped her home, and he went to work the next day. When he got home, he had a nap, and when he woke up it was about 8 p.m. This is on the day that Christian died. And his pal Jeff, who he'd been with the night before, called him and said, "Have you heard? Christian's killed himself." And obviously he's like, what? He hadn't heard. He calls Whitley. Whitley actually tells Matt that Christian found out about her and him the evening before, and that she found Christian in the bathroom and that he had shot himself in the throat. So a completely contrary story to what she's been telling the police. And of course Christian wasn't shot in the throat, so why she told this to Matt is anyone's guess. Matt's a bit freaked out by this, understandably, and he completely backs off from Whitley, and she keeps calling him and texting him, and he just avoids her calls. Eventually Matt actually speaks to Whitley again, and he says to her, well, by this stage everyone knows the story and that Dylan had found him and where he'd been shot. And he said, "Why did you tell me that you found him and that he'd been shot in the throat?" And Whitley completely denied having ever said this and said that it was all in Matt's head, which he said was most certainly not the case. She also told Matt that he had threatened to shoot himself and that she had said to him, "If you do shoot yourself, make sure you don't do it in the face." So Matt actually spoke to the police. Now, I'm not aware of whether they came to him or he went to them, but he did speak to police. He told them everything that he knew, all the sort of like conflicting information, what Whitley had said to him, what had happened the night before. He also said that on the afternoon of the 26th, which is when Christian was killed, she was calling him all day trying to get him to pick her up, but he'd been at work, so he hadn't actually received the calls. He only got them afterwards. And all of these calls were actually made from Christian's phone. Now, we do know that her phone was actually broken during the row, so she perhaps had been using his phone. But would he have given her his phone to phone the guy that he had issue that she had been with the night before? I very much doubt it. And even if she lied and said she were perhaps speaking to someone else, the evidence would be on that phone as to who she was calling, and this was repeatedly, it wasn't one call. So people have said, it's been opposed that at that stage, Christian was most probably already dead. Speaking about Whitley actually having Christian's telephone, when she was actually taken to the police station on the day of Christian's death, she actually had his cell phone in her possession, but she refused to give it to them, despite them asking numerous times. It was only when they said, "Look, until you give us that cell phone, you are not leaving this police station," that eventually she very reluctantly gave them the phone. Also, interestingly in this case, when Matt spoke to the police, he said that Whitley and Dylan had a sexual relationship and that she had stayed at home on multiple occasions. So it is pretty much hypothesized by most people that Dylan was most probably the one that shot Christian, but the entire thing was masterminded by Whitley, who wanted to get the life insurance for herself, for the money. And she already had been said by her own friends to be extremely manipulative, so it is something that is quite possibly the case. Something that was found after the event is that Christian's car that was parked at Magnolia Marine where he worked was actually moved during the hours when he was on the boat, when he was in work in the early hours of the morning. Now this wasn't Christian, and on investigation, on checking that car, something was missing. It was a lockbox that Christian kept in the car, which is said to have contained approximately $7,000 and a gun. Now, Christian didn't like to leave large amounts of money in the house, because in short he did not trust Whitley not to take it and spend it on drugs, so he kept it in a lockbox in his car, and that money was missing and has never been found. Something I want to add to the end of this, there is so much information, folks, so much I haven't gone into. I would really encourage you, if you're interested, to go and check out, especially Kendall Rae's documentary on this. But I will link the different sources that I've got my information from below if you're interested to see it. And I will talk at the end about a petition I would really like you to go and sign, which I will also link below. But lastly, following this, now Whitley and Dylan were never arrested, were never charged. This is ruled a suicide. Everyone that knew Christian said he would never have killed himself. He loved life too much. Now, it can be said that a lot of people don't really know what's going on inside the mind of their loved ones sometimes, and it can be very shocking when they commit suicide. So I would never go on that. I would never go solely on a person saying no, they wouldn't do that. Because sometimes that happens, but When you put together all the evidence and when you put together just the authority in the area's complete refusal to look at anything, it has to be said that someone very up in authority, a chief, lived in the same apartment building where Christian died, and it has been suggested that it wouldn't look particularly good. He was coming up for a big promotion job. It wouldn't look particularly good if someone had been murdered in his building block. So that's perhaps just hypothesis. That's just a point that I thought I'd make. But this family have come up against just obstacle after obstacle have been put in their way. Even these experts coming forward and saying, no, this was not a suicide, this was a homicide. And these are the reasons why. All the reasons listed. Even though the statements of Whitley and Dylan don't add up, even though they're contradictory, even though there's evidence that was just overlooked, they will not open this case again. It's shut and they will not open it. Even down to the family trying to get another DA elected because the one that was in power just did not want to know. A lady called Cassie. Kendall Rae goes into this. She actually is there through the elections. And the gentleman that actually says, if I get into power, I will reopen this case and I will look at this for you. They do everything they can to get this guy in. And in the town, people tear down his election campaign posters. They turn them upside down. Everything is done within this town to try and keep this family down from getting the truth. People are horrible to them. People say, you're just dredging all this up and it's a suicide and you can't accept it. And I honestly, having watched this and having seen the evidence, do not believe for a second that this was a suicide. The more I watch, other people don't believe it was a suicide. Sometimes people in certain areas get together and they don't want something to be ruled a certain way because it looks a certain way for their town. This town was seen to be corrupt. There's a lot of crime in it. Most crimes are pled out in court. There's no proper sentencing. It's just madness. But I was going to leave on a final note. Dylan, after this event, spent quite a bit of time in prison for completely unrelated offences. And a prisoner that actually served time with Dylan said that Dylan told him that him and I think he used the expression, a bitch, had killed someone with the intention of getting money from it, but they fucked up and they ended up not getting any money. This prisoner came forward and said this, and still nothing has been done. Could he have been talking about Christian? Obviously that $7,000 in that lockbox is missing. Whitley tried to get on life insurance policy. They tried to go to his bank and empty his account, but were unable to. Is it possible that he was talking about Christian? Will we ever know? So that is the story of Christian Andreacchio. I apologise if I'm saying that name incorrectly. Very interesting case, very sad case. The family just will not let this go, and rightly so. His mother is completely determined to get justice for her son. So there is actually a movement started to get justice for Christian. There are, at the moment, over 54,000 signatures on a petition. If that reaches 100,000, the White House is officially, they have to talk about this. They have to decide what they're going to do going forwards. So as I signed it today, it was on the mid 54,000. So what I shall do is put a link below in the description. I would very much appreciate if you would sign the petition, and remember to verify the signature via the email link that you receive. Anything that we can do to help this family. I know I've got a very small channel, and probably smaller still, that actually watch videos of this length or of this nature, but I'm hoping to reach people that perhaps have not already been reached by other American true crime YouTubers who are doing these things. And if you can share that on social media or whatever, if indeed you're in agreement with most people and feel that this deserves investigation, signing the petition doesn't mean that you immediately say someone is guilty. Signing that petition means that the family get the investigation they deserve, that they have this looked into properly, proper full investigation, experts in court, the full shebang, and they get justice for Christian. So if you've watched this far, thank you very much for watching. As I already said, I will link the different sources below, and I would very much encourage you, if you have an interest in the case, to check these out, and let me know in the comments what you feel. Thanks for watching. Over and out from Lisa Lives.